break room on the 14th floor smelled like burnt coffee and someone else's ambition. You can learn everything you need to know about a company by watching who refills the pot and who just takes the last cup and walks away. I'd been the one refilling it for 22 years. My name doesn't matter as much as my title did: Senior Structural Engineer, Hargrove and Bell Construction, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I joined when the firm was still small enough that the founder knew everyone's kids' names. By the time I was done, we had 4 offices, 200 employees, and a CFO who'd never poured a foundation in his life. His name was Garrett. Garrett came in 3 years before it all fell apart. Mid-30s, sharp suit, MBA from somewhere with a good basketball team. He had the kind of confidence that fills a room before you've decided whether you like him. He called everything a strategic pivot and referred to experienced staff as legacy resources. The first time I heard him say that in a meeting, I wrote it down on my notepad just to look at it. Legacy resource. 22 years of building bridges, parking structures, and a hospital expansion that won a regional safety award. Legacy resource. My daughter called that evening and I told her about it. She laughed. "Dad," she said, "that's just corporate talk. Don't let it get to you." I didn't. Not then. The project that defined everything was the Kellerman Bridge rehabilitation. 40-year-old span over the Allegheny, 2 lanes, federally funded, 6-month timeline with a hard deadline tied to grant disbursement. I've been on 3 similar projects in my career. I knew every subcontractor, every inspection checkpoint, every buried surprise that old bridges hide in their bones. Garrett had other ideas about who should lead it. He brought in a young project manager named Troy. Troy was 29, PMP certified, and had managed commercial interior renovations for 4 years before joining Hargrove and Bell. Nice enough kid, genuinely enthusiastic. He used project management software the way some people use religion, with complete faith that it would solve problems it wasn't designed for. I was assigned as technical consultant, which meant I was there when Troy needed me, and invisible when he didn't. The first 3 months went fine. I flagged the drainage issue on the east abutment that the original survey missed, fixed before it became structural. Troy thanked me in front of the team, which I appreciated. I thought maybe this would work. Then Garrett started sitting in on the Monday check-ins. Things change when someone like Garrett enters a room. The focus shifts from what's actually happening to what sounds like it's happening. Troy started presenting dashboards instead of walkthroughs. Green status indicators everywhere. I sat in the back and looked at my own notes, and the two didn't match. I sent internal memos, 3 of them over 6 weeks. Documented, time-stamped, sent to Troy and CC'd to Garrett. The first was about rebar spacing on the west deck panel that didn't meet spec. The second was about a concrete pour that happened during a temperature window I wouldn't have approved. The third was about the timeline. We were behind, actually behind, not dashboard behind. Garrett called me into his office after the third one. It wasn't hostile. That was the strange part. He was perfectly pleasant, the way a doctor is pleasant before bad news. He talked about team cohesion and unified messaging, and how my memos were creating friction in the communication chain. He suggested I direct future concerns to Troy verbally rather than in writing. I said I preferred written documentation on structural matters. He said he appreciated that perspective. 2 weeks later, HR called me in. The severance package was fair, I'll give them that. 17 weeks, full benefits through the end of the year, a standard NDA that I had my son-in-law's college roommate, who happened to be an employment attorney in Columbus, review before I signed it. He said it was clean. I signed it. I was 56 years old. I had never been fired in my life. I drove home on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when everyone else was still at work, and the highway was almost empty. And I thought about my father, who had worked the same steel mill job for 31 years and retired with a party and a plaque, and enough pension to take my mother to Myrtle Beach every spring until she passed. Different world, different rules. My wife met me at the door. She didn't say anything, just handed me a coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with me. We sat there for a while without talking. "They'll figure it out," she finally said. I didn't know then how precisely right she was. I spent November doing things I hadn't done in years. Fixed the deck stairs that had been rotting since 2019. Took my grandson to 3 of his Saturday morning soccer games in a row, instead of just the ones I could catch. Read actual books, paper ones, 2 of them. Started sleeping 8 hours, which felt criminal for the first 2 weeks, and then just felt correct. My daughter called every few days. She was worried in the careful way adult children get worried, not asking directly, just checking in, listening for the tone under the words. My son-in-law was more direct about it. "You could consult," he said, independently. "You've got 22 years of contacts." He wasn't wrong. I had contacts. I also had something else. I had those 3 memos saved to my personal email because I always backed up anything work-related that I'd written. Old habit from early in my career when a colleague of mine got burned on a dispute and had no paper trail. I never forgot that. December was quiet. January 2. The call I wasn't expecting came on a Wednesday morning in February, while I was in the garage reorganizing my tool bench. My cell phone was sitting on the workbench, and I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the area code. Pittsburgh, but not a number I had saved. It was a woman from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. She identified herself and her division, Federal Aid Project Oversight, and asked if I was the senior structural engineer on the Kellerman Bridge Rehabilitation Project prior to November. I said I was. She asked if I would be willing to speak with them, that there were some concerns that had come up during a routine inspection and my name had been referenced in project documentation. I asked what kind of concerns. She paused the way people pause when they're choosing words carefully. Structural compliance concerns, she said. Related to the West Deck panel. I sat down on my shop stool. When would you like to meet? I said. They came to my house the following Tuesday. 2 of them, the woman from the phone, and a man from the Federal Oversight Division whose business card said he worked out of the Philadelphia regional office. They were professional and thorough, and they had a lot of documentation spread across my kitchen table within about 20 minutes. I recognized most of it. Some of it I had written myself. I got my laptop and showed them my backup copies of the 3 memos. The woman looked at the man. The man looked at the memos. Then he looked at me. These were sent internally, he asked. Documented, time-stamped, CC'd to senior management, I said. I can forward them to you right now if you'd like. He said he'd like that very much. What I found out over the following weeks, through conversations with the investigators and eventually through my attorney, because I retained one, a good one, a woman who'd spent 12 years doing construction litigation in Allegheny County, was this: the West Deck panel had been poured outside temperature and humidity specifications. The rebar spacing in 2 sections didn't meet the load requirements for a federally classified bridge, and the project had been signed off at multiple checkpoints by people who either didn't know what they were looking at or chose not to look too closely. The inspection that triggered the inquiry had found microfracturing in the deck surface. Nothing catastrophic yet. Nothing that had hurt anyone. But the kind of thing that left unaddressed on a 40-year-old bridge carrying 6,000 vehicles a day stops being theoretical. I cooperated fully. Not out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I had no interest in burning anyone. I cooperated because 22 years of structural engineering is 22 years of understanding exactly what happens when the wrong things get signed off on. I'd seen the aftermath of one serious bridge failure during my career, 30 miles outside of Cincinnati, 2009. Small span, rural county road. No fatalities, but a school bus had crossed it 2 hours before. I still thought about that. I gave them everything I had, the memos, my personal project notes, the specific inspection windows I had flagged, the names of the subcontractors I tried to raise concerns with. The investigation expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. Garrett, it turned out, had approved a change order that reduced the concrete specification on the deck panels, a cost-saving measure that he had signed off on without engineering review. That change order had been buried in a revision package that went through during a period when Troy was managing 4 projects simultaneously and, by his own later account to investigators, had flagged it for review, and then the review never happened. The federal contract had specific requirements. The change order violated them. That made it a federal compliance issue, not just an internal quality problem. Garrett was placed on administrative leave in March. I heard this from a former colleague who still worked there. Someone I'd had lunch with every other Thursday for 12 years who texted me one afternoon with just, "Garrett's gone, don't know details. Thought you should know." I set my phone down and looked out the window at the backyard for a while. My wife came in from the garden and I told her. She sat down. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it. "Like I filed the paperwork correctly," I said. She laughed. That's the right kind of laugh when something like that happens. Not triumphant, just released. Troy resigned before the formal findings were published. I heard he'd moved back to Ohio, was doing project management for a commercial developer. I didn't wish him anything bad. He'd been in over his head and handled it poorly and paid for it. That's its own kind of consequence. The firm's federal contracting eligibility was suspended pending the investigation outcome. The Kellerman Bridge project was put into remediation. A separate engineering team, state-appointed, was brought in to assess and repair. I know 2 of the engineers on that team. They're good. In April, I got a call from a law firm in Pittsburgh that represented the consortium of the federal oversight agencies involved in the case. They asked if I would serve as a technical expert witness, walk through the documentation, explain the engineering standards to a non-technical audience, help the investigators and eventual legal proceedings understand what should have happened and when. I said yes. I sat in a federal building conference room in downtown Pittsburgh for 2 full days in May. I brought every document I had. I answered questions clearly and without editorializing. I explained rebar spacing requirements, the way I explain them to my grandson when we're building something in the garage. From first principles in plain language until you understand not just what the rule is, but why the rule exists. At the end of the second day, the lead attorney for the Oversight Consortium shook my hand and said, "We wish we'd found you 6 months earlier." I said, "You would have found my memos. Same thing." She smiled. I didn't go back to Hargrove and Bell. They called, actually, someone from the board, not Garrett, in March before the formal findings came out. Very careful conversation. Words like clarify the transition and revisit the arrangements. I let my attorney take that call. She called me afterward and said, "They're scared." I said, "They should focus on the bridge." She said she'd convey that. I started consulting independently in March. Put together a simple website, sent emails to 6 former clients I'd worked with directly over the years, and had 3 conversations that turned into contracts within the first month. The work is different now. I come in when there's a specific problem, I document everything, I give my professional opinion, and let people decide what to do with it. Some of them listen, most of them actually. My son-in-law made a comment at Easter dinner that I probably should have started consulting 10 years ago. My daughter told him to mind his business. I told him he wasn't wrong, but that I probably wasn't ready 10 years ago in ways I didn't understand at the time. The formal findings from the oversight investigation were published in June. I won't quote from them. My attorney advised me to let the documents speak for themselves, but the summary was public record and local Pittsburgh news covered it. The headline in one piece used the phrase systemic documentation failures. I saw it on my phone and thought about 3 timestamp memos sitting in a CC field for months. Someone from the engineering department at Hargrove and Bell, someone junior, someone I'd mentored briefly years back, sent me a message on LinkedIn. Just 2 sentences. "I heard you testified. Good." I typed back, "Take notes. Save everything." He sent back a thumbs up. That's the advice. That's all of it, really. 22 years of structural work, 2 days of testimony, 6 months of watching a company find out the difference between documentation and dashboards. Take notes. Save everything. Because the thing about bridges is that they don't care about status indicators. They care about the rebar. They care about the temperature the day of the pour. They care about the engineer who flagged the drainage on the east abutment in August and wrote it down. The Kellerman Bridge is closed for remediation until next spring. When they reopen it, there will be a ribbon cutting and some officials will take photos and drivers will cross it and not think about any of this. That's exactly how it should work. That's what the work is for. I'll be watching the soccer game that Saturday. Front row. I think about the east abutment sometimes. The drainage issue nobody would have caught if I hadn't been standing in the mud at 7 in the morning with a flashlight and 22 years of knowing what water does to old concrete. That's the thing about experience. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly prevents disasters that never make it onto anyone's dashboard. What happened to me at Hargrove and Bell wasn't unusual. That's the part that took me a while to sit with. Garrett wasn't some cartoon villain. He was a man who had been rewarded his entire career for projecting confidence over substance, and he brought that same skill set into a field where the materials don't care about confidence. Steel doesn't care. Concrete doesn't care. The Allegheny River doesn't care. Eventually, something in that chain was going to care, and it did. I've thought a lot about what actually protected me through all of it, and it comes down to 3 things that my father modeled without ever naming them. The first was doing the right thing, even when it cost me something. I sent those memos knowing Garrett wouldn't like them. I sent them anyway because my name was on that project, and 6,000 vehicles a day were going to cross that bridge, and I wasn't willing to let my silence be part of what went wrong. That's not heroism. That's just the baseline of what it means to do work you can stand behind. When the investigators spread those documents across my kitchen table, I wasn't anxious, I was ready, because I had told the truth when it was inconvenient, and the truth had a paper trail. The second was knowing what I knew and trusting it. Not arrogance. I want to be careful about that distinction. Troy wasn't stupid. He was inexperienced and put in a position that required experience he didn't have. The error wasn't his youth. It was a system that confused credentials with competence and dashboards with reality. I had spent 22 years learning the difference between what something looks like and what it actually is. That knowledge was worth something, and no severance package changed that. When the federal investigators needed someone who could explain rebar spacing to a non-technical audience, they called me. Not because of my title, because of what I actually understood. The third was staying steady when staying steady wasn't comfortable. The months between October and February were quiet in ways that felt loud. My wife sat with me at the kitchen table. My daughter called to check the tone under the words. I fixed the deck stairs. I went to soccer games. I didn't perform recovery. I just kept moving through ordinary days until the ordinary days added up to something. That kind of steadiness isn't glamorous, but it's what keeps you clear-headed enough to answer an unexpected phone call correctly, to know immediately that you want to cooperate, to walk into a federal building 2 days in a row and tell the truth without flinching. Garrett's career ended because he optimized for the appearance of results instead of the results themselves. That's a cause. The federal investigation was the effect. Those things are connected by a straight line, even if the line took months to become visible. I'm not interested in what happened to him beyond that. What I'm interested in is the bridge being right when it reopens. And it will be, because now the people with the flashlights are the ones making the calls. Take notes. Save everything. Do the work like your name is going to be on it, because it is.